Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. Hey everyone, please hit the like button. I don't know how to spell algorithm. Okay, so please hit the like button. Helps fuel the algorithm. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell. If you are on this, I would assume that you probably have already hit the notification bell. This is going to be a little bit different of a stream tonight than I have done usually, than I do usually. Usually we discuss a physics discussion or physics-related discussion, and tonight we're going to talk about theology, because there is no difference between these two subjects if theism is accurate. If existence is a sentient being, then we have to talk about theology. We're not going to talk about one religion over another tonight, and so, just know that. I don't believe that one religion is true over others. I do believe that there are true theological traditions, you could call them, or you could call them religions, but I hate that term. And then I believe that there are some that are false, and we're never going to talk about those. They're like very small. They're not any of the major world theological traditions. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because there has just been a discussion that has been going on in circles online lately, and I participated in a panel discussion on a channel called King Pilled the other day on this topic about, is God one? Is God three? Is God three in one? Who is God? What is God? And how should we think about this? And we're going to talk about logic tonight. We're not going to talk about scripture very much, because whether you accept scripture is on you. I do believe scripture, the scriptures of the Abrahamic traditions. I personally do. But we're going to talk about logic because that's what this channel is about. And it's rare that I feel like every single episode of this channel is about God, because that's what sentient singularity theory is about. But it's usually done through in a different way than I think we're going to do it tonight. But we're not going to go through scripture for the most part, even though we'll reference it. But I'm going to take you guys through sentient singularity theory and why I think it can lead to a lot of answers on these questions. And it has led to a lot of answers on these questions. Sentient singularity theory is the theory that existence itself is a singular sentient being. And that singular sentient being is creating additional sentient beings within itself according to a specific pattern. Another way of putting this is one God theory. And first we have to define God, because many people don't really know what God means. And God does have a specific definition. Now, there's all kinds of translations and things that people will reference and try and say that, oh, it depends on the circumstances. If we're going to assume that God is a being that is specific and special and unique, then God has a specific and special and unique and true definition. And that is the singular sentient being that is the source of all other sentient beings and is also existence itself. It is the being that is containing of and animating of and creating of all other beings. It's the highest being in a hierarchy of truth and of direction, you could say. And that being is a sentient being. It's a person. It's not a human. It's a person, though. Like, you're a person, and your dog is a person. It's not a human, but it's a person. It has sentience. And that is what is necessary as well to always remember when defining God. God is not a higher power that is not self-aware and does not have feelings at all and doesn't, have a will, his own will. It is a being that has its own will that will be done, and it is a being that has feelings, like you. And you might not believe this, and, that's fine. I'm not here to try and force my beliefs on you, but I will walk through where I got my beliefs initially and how I, went through my journey with this topic a bit tonight. I've talked about it on many streams, but I'm going to talk about it more in detail tonight. And I don't do that very often. And because this was a first-hand experiential journey for me with first-hand experiences and also a logical quest. And it didn't start at the position that I did not start this with the position that I currently have. That's what I'm trying to say. And I was a self-described atheist for 24 years. And then I tried to figure out the nature of consciousness because I was trying to figure out artificial in general intelligence and what its political implications would be on humanity. And when I started mapping the dimensions of mind, I realized it was lining up with physics and everything else, and that's how sentient singularity theory was born, basically. But I completely reformed and switched my opinion on theism, I guess. And not even just on theism, on atheism. Not just that I'm no longer self-describing as an atheist, but that I don't even believe that atheism is possible. And the reason why it's not possible is because you can only be a theist or an anti-theist. There's also no such thing as polytheism. And the reason why this is the case is that if God is existence, sentient existence, then you interact with that being every day, constantly. You can't not interact with that being, which means that you have experience with that being, and you will have assumptions about the universe because you're in it. If you have assumptions about the universe, those assumptions will either be it's a sentient being that I'm in a relationship with, or it's just inanimate matter to be, used as I can, and it's basically random that we're even here, and there's no meaning to it. It was I don't want to say it was an accident that we're here, but we are randomly here. That's a better way of putting it. That's anti-theism. That's not atheism. Atheism is supposed to be, if you listen to Sam Harris and everybody, this lack of belief in God. I don't disbelieve in God. I have a lack of belief in God. I don't have any belief in God. That's not possible. And you can tell that by the way that people who call themselves atheists act. They are opposed to God. Okay? And I say this from experience. They're not caring. And even agnostics, I feel like, are just people who are either less confident anti-theists or less confident theists, and they're afraid of pissing off God if he does exist, and they're not so confident in their theism, but they have an intuition. So I don't even believe that agnosticism exists. You either can be a more confident theist or a more confident anti-theist, but you can't be an agnostic, meaning like I don't know. You might not know, but you have a belief. And everybody does. You can be agnostic about Bigfoot, because if you're not interested in Bigfoot, you don't study Bigfoot, like I don't study Bigfoot, I know nothing about Bigfoot, I'm an agnostic about Bigfoot. I don't have any opinion. I lack a belief, and that is something that you can only have with a subject that you don't constantly interact with. And God, by definition, is existence, and so you have to have an opinion on existence. Is it sentient, and you're inside of a sentient being like you? Or is it not sentient, and sentience arises from unconsciousness and is, due to randomness and flukes of the universe? And or multiverses, I don't know, like many worlds or something. But these are really the only two opinions that you can have. And neither one is one to be ashamed of. Okay? Because you just have to be honest. That's it. If you're honest, that's all you have to be. If you don't believe that this universe is a sentient being, then be honest about it. If you claim to be a theist, but you're really not, that's not good. But if you claim to be an anti-theist and treat other people well still, that's fine. It's not a problem. Honesty is a good thing, always. It is humility. Self-honesty is humility. And it's important for growth for anybody. So, but theism is just the belief that that this world is a sentient being, that this existence is a sentient being, not planet Earth, but that existence itself. And we're going to talk about the Trinity, I guess you could say. But we're going to talk more about triality first, which is a phenomenon in nature that is observed everywhere and is responsible for what is called in theology the Trinity. And we're going to talk about many other structures, basically, that are involved in theology. So with that, I'm going to take a break and look at the chat. I've been staring at a screen all day, so bear with me. But I will just say that I enjoyed my discussion with you guys and my wife last week. We did our Ask Me Anything on marriage, and if you did not see it, I recommend it. And I just appreciate everybody's participation in that. That was nice. So, the one of the many me's. Me too, grew up with religion, but from teens till like mid-30s, I would have said atheist, favor idealism, and never go that far now. Here's the thing about idealism. Idealism is theism. If idealism isn't theism, then it's not idealism. It's materialism, but it's anti-theism. Idealism is that the world is fundamentally ideas, and those ideas exist in a mind. And if the world is fundamentally a mind, then that's theism. So, it's just interesting how we have changed the terms again and again and again. Now we say metamathematics instead of metaphysics, and we say idealism instead of, panpsychism, essentially, or theism, really, which is basically that they're not the same thing, because in how we interpret them, because panpsychism is assumed to mean that this knife is sentient and this water bottle is sentient and things like that, and that's not true. But all is sentient, but that doesn't mean everything is sentient. Everyone is sentient, though. That is true. that is the definition of being someone. This channel is called The Theory of Every0ne. And that's not, unrelated to this discussion, obviously. It's every0ne. There's your personness means that you're sovereign and distinct to some degree in your will. That is what defines sovereignty, is that you have the ability to make choices that are independent of others. And so this is what Tom Campbell says about what consciousness is. He's like, consciousness is free will with the choice. And I guess a better way of putting it is just will. It's just will with a choice. And will is one of the foundations of my work, because it was the initial thing that I identified as the driving force of consciousness. It is will. And will, at least as defined by me, is the desire to do that which is not being done. The desire to do that which is not being done. That's it. And free will is just choice. And it's the choice of where to put your will. That's it. It's not, it doesn't mean that every decision that we make throughout our days is a free will choice. That's not true. You have instincts, and most of the choices that you make are just instincts. But there are some decisions that we do make, particularly those that go against our nature and are done for a reason that is greater than the circumstances seem to be motivating. Those are instances in which you moved your will a little bit, and you just pushed it a bit to the side. That is what free will is. It's just the goal of your will, the freedom to create your own goals for your will. That's it. It's not people will say nonsense things, even like, oh, well, I don't have the free will to have certain thoughts. And it's like, you not in the moment, not necessarily, If I say, don't think of an elephant, obviously people know this. It's like you automatically think of an elephant. But, and you have no choice in it if you listen to me. But you do have the ability to guide your thoughts over time. That doesn't mean that you have complete control over whether or not a thought pops into your head, because if you hear something, you're going to think about it. But you can guide the goals of your thoughts, and that is what free will is. So any being that has that ability is sovereign and sentient. But it's very hard to identify that which is sentient sometimes, because if a being is in its proper environment, it's going to do what it seems to be programmed to do through its instincts, because that's the right thing to do. It's only when a being is outside of its environment where, for the most part, where it becomes easy to identify a division between that which is our programming, our instincts, and that which we would set as our sovereign goal. And humans are outside of their element. We have left the garden, and we are trying to make our own world with technology, and those instincts, though, are still there from when we didn't make our own world, and they don't really work very well in this one. So it's pretty easy for us to see this, but it wouldn't be necessarily so easy in other beings. So we're going to talk about this a bit. In my discussion on King Pilled, we were discussing they were advocating for the Trinity, and I was basically saying that the Trinitarian Godhead. Okay, what the Trinitarian Godhead is, according to them at least, is it is three persons in one essence, which is that essence is existence itself as in its totality, and that essence is God. And they made the argument that reality is fundamentally, primarily, persons. And that is true. Sentient singularity theory exactly states that. Sentient singularity theory states that the fundamental structure and nature of existence is singularities of sentience, which is persons. That's what it is. And I will just say that while beings can share an essence, you and me are human, and we share an essence, because that essence is a human essence. You know, what does that mean? You know, we can get into that, but it is specific. You know, that's what that essence makes us kind of human. But God is a little bit different. There is a divinely good, or like you could say perfect essence, but existence is not essence. It has an essence, but it's a person. If persons are the fundamental construct of reality, then reality itself must be a person. It cannot be an essence. It can have an essence, but it is a person. So ultimately, because there's one existence, if reality is fundamentally persons, and there's one reality, then there's one person that contains all other persons. You, me, and every other persons that we could imagine, or that has existed, or that will exist, will all be inside this one person's. Every cell in your body is within you, and we are within being as well. And the highest being that contains all the other beings has to have a word, a title, not just a word that is, you know, a label, but a title. You give a label to, you know, objects. This is a water bottle. That's the label. You give a title to a person. And there has to be a title or a name we could just, you know, use essentially for that person that is the person that contains all other persons and is the original person. And that being is what I call God. And so that's what we are going to talk about tonight. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat, but in sentient singularity theory, you start with this. A singular sentient being, essentially. Okay? Like, and just this is a singular sentience. Just think about that. It doesn't matter what like this is saying initially exactly, but just don't worry about that. It's just infinity is equal to 1. And then this is the initial existent condition. It is that initial existent condition is sentience. Okay? And the reason why is because, and what I was going to do my stream on tonight, and I'm going to push it till next week because of the relevance of this topic, because I went on a stream discussing it earlier this week. I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, to be honest. But I was going to talk about constructor theory. And constructor theory is a new approach to fundamental physics, quote unquote, and philosophy, and but it's physics. Physics is the study of impact. That's what it is. It's the study of impact, and everything that we, as we understand what that means to a greater and greater level, more and more things become looped into physics. And People would say consciousness is non-physical, but why do we keep talking about it in physics? It's just it's the study of impact. Idealism, if idealism is correct, which it is, then there is no distinction between that which is material and that which is not. It's just a matter of perspective. So the thoughts of the being that you're in, of the mind that we are all in, would manifest as concrete to you because they are higher than your thoughts in a hierarchy. So you can't just change them at your will. So this being, though, is sentient existence. And the reason why it is sentient, and it has to be sentient, is because it's the only way that it could be. And constructor theory is about the science of possible and impossible. Okay? We're going to talk about it next week. It's very good, I will admit, but it's very good. And it's very similar to what led to sentient singularity theory. But I think that it ultimately will support my work. But when you have information, which we know there's information because we can perceive that there's information, and you have to assume that there's information inside of any system, and that system would be existence. There is no non-existence. That means that existence itself is self-contained. Okay? It is an enclosed system. And an enclosed system of information is only able to reference itself. Think of a loop of information just going in a circle. And that information has nothing to reference outside itself because there is nothing outside of the system. The system is existence. There's nothing outside it. So it's by very nature and inevitably self-referencing, which is the same thing as being self-aware. And this is the reason why existence is sentient. Because it is the only way that existence could be. There is no way for existence to be other than sentient, because existence is a self-contained information system that therefore must, by the constraints of itself, only reference itself, which is self-awareness. It's self-referencing. You have to assume this, even though that logically is correct. I invite anybody to argue the logic of that, and I don't think you will succeed, but I do want you to try if you think that you can. But there's another problem for anti-theists, is that any logical worldview has to prioritize information logically. Okay, so your sources of information have to be categorized and arranged in a hierarchy that is sensible, that makes sense. And there is no information that gets prioritized above firsthand experience. And if I ask you, or if you ask yourself, what is the truest thing that you know, or what is the truest thing that I know? What is the assumption that is that is defining of and the foundation of all other assumptions and thoughts that we have? The answer is the same for everybody. It is I am. Okay? And the reason for this is because you can't escape your own self. So you can't make an observation actually beyond you. So what this means, though, is that you, according to your firsthand information that is garnered through your experience, that is constant, that has never, ever not been present. So meaning you have no examples of where this is not the truth. This means that existence is fundamentally sentient to you. And you have to assume that. If you look at a water bottle and you're like, that's not sentient, and so therefore the universe isn't sentient, what information should you prioritize first? Your own experience, or what you perceive, outside of yourself. If somebody, even taking it a degree further, tells you something about the universe as being just random inanimate matter, how can you believe that above your own experience? And your experience is telling you the universe is sentient. So while that might feel weird to you, and it might feel wrong to you, there's no logical way to avoid placing that information and that assumption as the foundation of everything else that you do. And if you don't do that, you will spiral into nonsense. And you can see this with people who don't place their own existence as foundational. Like, this is it's funny because I've been watching Sam Harris, and like, not to pick on anybody, but Sam Harris is a very, well-known quote unquote atheist, but he's an anti-theist. And I used to be a fan of his, and I don't have anything against him now, but like, I will say that he's definitely wrong, but he makes this argument that he thinks free will he was asked, is free will an illusion? Because that was the assumption that the person who was interviewing him had as being Sam's opinion. And Sam Harris said, no, the illusion of free will is an illusion, is basically what he said. Which makes no sense. It's not something that's deep and just must be really pondered. It makes no sense. And that is because he's basically he has tried to not assume sentience as primary. I'm not saying he did it consciously, but that is what happens. It is the inevitable reality of it. This person that was in our Discord, multiple people who were going for their PhDs in philosophy, came in like a year ago to have a discussion, and they were very nice, but I asked them what their thesis was, and they were challenging my work, and as they should, and it was very, very fun. And I said, what are you doing your thesis on? And they said consciousness, the philosophy of consciousness. And I said, what about consciousness? And they said that it doesn't exist. And I was like, who's doing their thesis? Like, this is not super complicated. It's super simple. And that's why it's hard, though, because it's different from everything else that we know. Because we're talking about foundations. We're not talking about that which is built on foundations. We're talking about foundations. So sentience it must be assumed as the nature of reality by you, if you're going to think about this logically. You can't take the observed experience of even this water bottle. Okay, I don't think this water bottle has an experience, but I'm just saying, if you look at this and you're like, I don't see that water bottle having an experience, so therefore the nature of the universe is not sentient. First of all, you're disregarding plenty of obviously sentient beings all around. And also, you are assuming that you can get your mind into the internal experience of the water bottle, which I don't think you can, because it doesn't have an internal experience according to my work. But even that is an assumption, because I'm not the water bottle, so I don't know. It's logical according to my model, but I can't tell you for sure. But what I can tell you is that I'm sentient, for sure. I assume my dog is sentient. I don't know for sure. I assume my wife is sentient. I don't really know for sure. Like, I assume it. I think so. Because, what's the point otherwise? We'll talk about it. But I know that I'm sentient. And if I'm sentient, then I should actually assume other beings around me that appear to be sentient are sentient. Because you know that sentience exists. Primarily. There's nothing that you know to be truer than that. And this is not something that is ever discussed by anybody today. We talk about, Descartes, he's like, I think, therefore I am. And that's close. It's close. But it's not quite actually true. I mean, it is true, but it's not as fundamentally true as it could be. And it's truer to say, I feel, therefore I am. Feeling is awareness. Thought is not necessarily awareness. Feeling is. Feeling is, it is when a thought is, it's not even when a thought is related to the self, but it's when information is contextualized around the self, that is when you get a feeling. So a thought is kind of more detached from you, but it's that doesn't mean that beings who are not sentient can think. They cannot. But beings that can think can only think because they can feel. And you don't necessarily need to think in order to feel, but you do need to feel in order to think. And that is why I use the word sentient instead of conscious, because sentience is defined by feeling. And so it's very important to highlight that there is a hierarchy there is a directionality to these things. Feeling is primary to thoughts. But this sentient being of a mind, in order to be self-aware, has to perceive 4 primary perspectives, essentially. And those primary perspectives are inside, outside, separate, and oneness. Now, the thing about these is that every single one is defined by the other. Okay? So inside is separate and oneness. Outside is separate from oneness. Oneness is inside and outside of separateness. And separateness is inside or outside of oneness. I mean, I guess you could say it's more like outside of oneness, but it's not actually. It's inside or outside of oneness, but that works. That's fine. But that means that being aware of one means you're aware of all. Okay? If you're aware of what's outside you, then you're aware of what's inside you. If you're aware of what's inside and outside of you, then you know what is you, oneness, and you know what is separate from you, separateness. If you are aware of what is separate from you, then you're aware of what's one with you. And if you're aware of what's one with you and separate from you, and we're talking about objective relationships, which is through assembly structures and nested assembly structures of sentience. I'm not talking about time. I'm talking about beyond time. Okay? I'm talking about what is fundamental, not what is relativistic. I'm not talking about space. I'm not talking about time. I'm talking about more foundational relationships than that. But you can say my cells are inside of me. I am one with my cells, and my dog is separate from me, and you could say that I am outside of my cells as well. You could say that because you're one with, but you're also kind of beyond your cells. So this allows you to orient within fundamental relationships, these 4 primary perspectives, and they were the discovery that led to the rest of my work being possible. It's impossible to do the rest of what I did without these. They allow for orientation beyond relativity. And they are the dimensions of mind. And so you're thinking about existence itself as a single mind. You can start to think about this being breaking itself down and creating within itself perspectives, okay, essentially. And I think that that we all that this forms the structures of fundamental reality from there on, and we can go into that another, maybe tonight, but maybe when I release the video outlining all of Sentient Singularity's theory structures. But this is a recurring pattern everywhere. And what's interesting, though, is that you could divide this in many ways. You could say that kind of oneness contains the rest almost, or that definitely singularity contains the rest, but that inside and outside are kind of two sides of one coin, and then you have separate and oneness as well that are kind of two sides of one coin, but it's like, oh man, this is tough. I gotta explain this. Because this is the structure of mind, okay? And we're inside a mind, it is the structure of information. And so all information has to be arranged into this that we see. And it also has to be the structure of all of the information that's generated in the universe. And so you can see like a triadic structure in this, because you could say that, I mean, I guess it depends on how you want to do it, because there's multiple ways of doing this. You can either say that outside contains separateness and I guess you could say that oneness contains outside and separateness and inside, essentially, because one is everything. When they're all united, that's oneness. But I mean, I see how that is the kind of the case, you could say, but it's not as foundational as how these unite into singularity, I guess. I'm kind of like stumbling on this, but it's very hard to talk about these things because I'm trying to place them into a context that is obvious, but without getting too theological. But I guess we'll just dive into theology. So let's do it. This is what is usually meant by the Trinity, okay? The Father is a different person than the Son. The Spirit, which in Judaism is called the divine soul, is a different person than the Father, and they're all different persons, but they all unite into one essence, is what people say. But this is not. This is actually very simple. It's very simple, okay. And it's made out to be complicated. This whole debate. This has been a debate for eons of the complication of the Trinity and how complicated it is. But all of these things are actually super simple, and it is that even if any multiplicity has to unite into one, because there's one existence, and if foundationally existence is primarily persons, then there's one person. But this is why I'm stumbling on. Okay, I'm gonna show you. Gosh, bear with me. I've been staring at a computer all day. I'm gonna use that as an excuse. But here, these are models of information change. Okay, I'm gonna get into them more in my stream in later, not tonight, but when I release a video on my theory. What the goal is of any of these models is to change all the information in the system. Okay, so. And maintain coherence the whole time. You have to maintain coherence. If you're going to do that, then what you get is a set number of steps or actions and set number of perspectives, depending on the size of the matrix that you're changing. So if the goal is to change all the ones to 0 here, and the zeros to ones, then this is the end state. So you can see the colors have switched, and because all the numbers have switched. And if you're going to maintain coherence, then you can't just change them, willy-nilly, like as an outside observer. You have to maintain coherence in the system. So you can change one at a time, because if you change multiple at a time, then they can't contextualize each other in order to keep coherence of the system. So with this, you get 17 perspectives and 16 actions. But with quantum system, which is one in which superposition can be maintained, which is what that 4 primary perspectives is, which is what a mind is it's a quantum information system. It's where you can put information into a superposition, and that's due to the effect that a sentient observer has. It's different from a computer. Like, your computer can just do this, but you can do this. And what's interesting is that no matter the size of the matrix, in changing the information in a quantum system, it could be insofar as this information is just two. I'm just using the ones and twos or ones and zeros, basically in this simple example, just make it easy. But it doesn't matter the size of the matrix in this, even though here it does. It matters, the size of the matrix. So if you have a 3x3 matrix, it's going to take a lot less time to change, or a lot less states and actions to change. So here you have a 3x3 matrix, and you end up taking 10 states or 10 perspectives, or I guess just states, and 9 actions to change it. It's different from above. When it's a 4x4 matrix, it takes 16 actions and 17 perspectives or states. But if it's a 4x4 matrix or a 3x3 matrix or a 2x2 matrix, it doesn't matter. Changing all the information in a superposition is 4 perspectives always and 3 actions. That's fascinating, because that aligns with a lot of things in scripture. Yud He Vav He, okay? The Yud He Vav He, which is used as like the name of God. It's a spin structure, essentially. It's a thing spinning around, and think about like Yud He Vav He. You're like watching something, and you can see through a window, and it's spinning, and you can like see Yud. Then it spins more, and He, and then Vav, and then He, and then it ends with Yud again. So Yud He Vav He Yud, and then that's a complete rotation, essentially. Or it's back to its starting place. This is information orienting around itself. That's what it is. And what's interesting about Yud He Vav He is that it's 4 letters, but it's only 3 different letters. Okay, so Yud He Vav He 4, but it's Yud He Vav. That's 3. So this is fascinating, because this pattern matches this. And it also matches this. So this pattern will manifest in creation according to a specific in a specific way. And I've made it in my mind, but I haven't done it on Excel yet, and I wish I did before I did this. And I was debating on whether or not to talk about constructor theory or this all night. So I wasn't very prepared for either one of them, unfortunately. But if you start from a singularity as the source, that basically will break when you start creating multiplicity and orienting within multiplicity into 2 here. And those 2 will be connected by kind of a superposition state, which is, you could say that this is sentience, or it's like the Holy Spirit. It is it's the sovereignness. Okay, it's the spirit of sovereignness, which is the only spirit that there is. Like I said, it's will with a choice. And you could say this is, the perspective of the Father and the perspective of the Son. Okay, but they're all always coming from and contained within this. Eventually, everything gets united into that again. So we're gonna, I'm definitely gonna have to do another stream on this, but we can see this in nature with things like generationality in humans. And, it's like 3 generations is the family. It's like to where all of a sudden 3 actions and you're back to start. Parents, it's like, grandparents, parents, and children. But it's like, it's just this recurring, constant state of actions, I guess. But those actions are also beings. But without any action, there is no other beings. Okay? And if you're God, then, and preceding creation, and you haven't created yet, then there is no other, there isn't a triality of action, I guess. There's a singularity of being. And that's just a logical inevitability. But I'm going to check the chat. Gosh. I wish I was more prepared, I will say. Hail everyone. Hail the one. Who is your favorite atheist? Who's my favorite atheist? Honestly, I don't know. Probably Sam Harris, because he's entertaining. Anti-theist, not atheist. But and I admire his drive. He's just so driven to like. But I don't agree with him on anything anymore. But it does seem like he, at least up until very recently, especially, it does seem like he's changed a bit. But he was very much trying to find the truth, and I hope he does, one day. But he, if you're not prioritizing information properly, I've talked about this on my discussion with James last week that I posted, that you can corrupt your file. So you're an information folder, basically, that's sentient. And if you're not prioritizing information properly, eventually you're going to corrupt it. And then, I don't know, then maybe you're beyond saving, just like a file. You're beyond saving. And that just due to the fact that you've eliminated yourself. It's not that you're just so bad and lightning bolt. It's like you've eliminated yourself by prioritizing the wrong information in your sense making, and it led to eventually you writing yourself out of existence, which is like the illusion of free will is an illusion. You wrote yourself out of existence. Oh, well, we're creating our thesis that consciousness is an illusion. Okay, well, you just wrote yourself out of existence. It's not good. And, this is why I don't like to come off as preachy about God or anything like that, because I know what that's like, and it's not helpful. You have to come to things honestly on your own. But I will say that you still have to prioritize certain things in how you view the world. And one of those things is that sentience is primary nature of existence as best you can tell. Now, whether or not you want to take that to its logical conclusion or not is on you, but you do have to prioritize that. If you start saying, well, I don't know if I'm actually sentient, well, then I don't know, maybe someone needs to smack you or something so you can feel it. Like, it brings you back, hopefully. But I don't know how you write yourself out of that entirely. I think that it does take, to some degree, like, lots of effort. And that I don't know what else it would take, though. Because how do you deny it's denying of your own existence. Like, how are you going to do anything after that? You can't argue for the existence of anything if you deny your own existence. It just doesn't make any sense. You just lose yourself, and you lose your coherence, and you end up corrupting your file. And that's I think that's a big problem today, especially, is that a lot more people are starting to corrupt their files, that's because of the education system is indoctrinating people into prioritizing secondhand information above firsthand information. But that's not really the real problem. Is not that you're being told nonsense. The real problem is that you're not being allowed to figure out the truth, because you are being forced to sit in a classroom and memorize out of context information, which is not information, for 8 hours of your day until you're too exhausted to even try to think anymore. And you're not experiencing the world because you're sitting at a desk. And so that, I think, is the real problem, is that it's not the exposure to nonsense. Always had exposure to nonsense. The change now is the lack of allowing for people to think and to learn and to experience the truth and figure it out for themselves. If you have no time to do anything other than just study, and then by the time you're done, you're just like emotionally exhausted, and you can't, ponder the God for a little bit, and you're just gonna veg out on video games or binge watch, shows with your wife, which I relate to, like, then you're going to have a problem, potentially, because you're just not going to have the time to learn how to think. So there are still upcoming illusionists. I don't know who they would be. Did you hear about Owen and Jim Bob? Yeah, I'm not getting involved in that at all. Both of those guys are my friends. I'm not getting involved in that. I'm not going to talk about it either. Sam Harris is really fun to listen to. Yeah, he definitely is. Sadly, many files have been corrupted. Yeah, they have. What's up, Torin? Real C guns. I agree, it is theistic as well. I find it interesting that mathematically there is no middle ground between determined or random. There's no middle ground between determined and random, because randomness, it doesn't exist. Determinism and choice are dependent on each other. You can't have determinism in a sentient system that is absent choice. And you can't have choice absent determinism in any system, because in order to make a choice, you need to know, if you're going to choose two paths, you need to know where they're going, or else it's not a choice. If you're just going to flip a coin, then, which is our way of kind of injecting randomness, but it's not really randomness. It's just, the appearance of randomness to us. Then that's not a choice. If you're just like, I don't know where these two roads go, so I'm going to choose the one on the right, because it's closer. That's not a choice. You have to know where the road is going in order to make a choice. So you have to have determinism in order to have free will. There are dependent concepts. There's no such thing as random. That's why there's no middle ground between random and anything, because random doesn't actually exist. There's irrelevant or apparently irrelevant, but there isn't. It doesn't mean irrelevant to anything. It just means like irrelevant to a specific goal. But there isn't random, and so and there is always determinism and always choice, which is free will. The universe itself, the creation itself, was a choice, and this is very important to realize, because it sets the foundation for everything else about the metaphysical and the implications of the metaphysics that come downstream. So this is this is going to be a rough stream, guys. I'm just telling you. I will come back to this and be more organized, but like I said, I debated up until very last minute of which of these to talk about, and I decided to go with this one because I want to reread the constructor theory paper before I talk about it. But and I went on a stream about this recently. But here's the thing, is that if the universe's default state is, or if existence, not the universe, if existence's default state is that it is all that exists, then its default state is oneness or singularness. And that means that multiplicity must have been a choice, because it goes against the nature of existence. Okay? It does. It is the nature of creation, but it goes against the nature of existence. It is against the nature of God to be multiple. And it is an intentional, multiplicity is a result of intentional actions by God to create multiplicity. But so in this king-pilled stream that I did, was interesting because they said that, God is three persons, one essence. And as I said before, you can have an essence. We all have an essence, but God can't be an essence. That's the same thing as saying, like, God is evolution. It's just or God is logic. God isn't logic. Logic is defined by God. Or you could say, it's the same as saying, God is love. God is not love. Love is defined by God, is a better way of putting it. Or it's not that God isn't love, but it's that you can't define God by love. You define love by God. That's the way to put it. This was something that was an issue on that king-pilled stream, and I wish I had written down like exactly what I wanted to talk about from that, but I wasn't sure I really wanted to talk about even that when I talked about this, but I definitely do. In it, they said they were trying to say that I was wrong because in my model, Sentient Singularity theory, meaning comes from your impact on another. And the reason why this is the case is multiple. There are multiple bits of information that led to that conclusion, but you know this, because if you exist in this world and you don't impact other people, then you feel meaningless, and you feel like you have an existential crisis. And that's because we know intuitively that impacting other beings is meaning. And the reason why this has to be the case is because the foundation of reality is personness. It's sentience. It's sentient singularities. Okay, so it's a sentient singularity, which means like person. And if that's the case, then that is fundamentally what exists, which if you want to impact anything, all you can really impact is existence, which means like sentience. But if you're all there is, if you're the only one, then there's no one for you to impact. And this is why I believe God created the universe, is because I think God realized he was meaningless, and he was lonely, and or he wasn't lonely, he was alone. I don't know if he was lonely. I think he was, but he was alone. That is a fact. It's not a thought of mine. It's a thought of mine that God was lonely, but I would assume, but I don't know. But I know God was alone. And I know that God was meaningless because he's alone. Where is meaning? And so, what do you do when you're alone and you're all there is? You make others to impact, to give you meaning. And as soon as you do that, you become the most meaningful being that ever existed, because every other being owes itself and owes their existence to you. Now you went from the only being that's ever been meaningless to the most meaningful being that ever will be in one action. And this is just Sentient Singularity theory's perspective on this, which is what I just stated, gives an explanation for why creation exists. But the people who I was discussing this topic with, who were very nice, by the way. Like, I got along well with all of them. One of them is a friend of mine, is Jim Bob, and the other two I don't remember their names, but like they were nice. It was a genuine conversation, and but I will say they're wrong, and about not everything, but about this one thing, which is that there's not one essence, there's one person that is, that has an essence at the top. And their logic would imply that too, if existence is fundamentally persons, but they didn't see that. But another problem with this, though, is that if existence is fundamentally three persons, it's multiple persons, it's not one person, then there's no motivation for creating more. Because love and meaning and all of these things can happen already. If fundamental reality is three, even preceding creation, then there's no motivation for creation. So people say this all the time. They're like, in Genesis it says, "Let us make man in our image." That works perfectly with sentient singularity theory. I think that it doesn't matter how you interpret that. There's multiple interpretations that could be true of that, and simultaneously, and they all are consistent with sentient singularity theory. If you're a Christian and you're like, well, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and you're like using that as justification for the idea that God is this trialic being, then the thing about that is that that's not against what I'm saying either. It's not against Genesis, which is in the beginning, let us, multiplicity. But I'm talking about beyond the beginning, not in the beginning, beyond it. And I wrote something on my website that said, this is it. I'll read it. And it's not against anything that I just stated from Scripture. Whether you believe Scripture or not is not the point. But the point is that it's not against that. If you go to my website and you go to writings, this is my website, sentientsingularity.com. You go to writings, and it says this: beyond the beginning, sentience exists, existence is sentient, and sentience is one. The sentient one is sovereign and eternal and alone, and wills to create another. The sentient one divides their singular beingness to multiply and manifest meaning. The sacrificial spirit of the willing one emanates within to generate and animate creation. And it goes on. And then it says, this is the beginning. And so there's a difference here between beyond the beginning and the beginning. There's an action that already results in multiplicity here, but not here. And so You can read the rest of that there. I will read it. I'm gonna do another stream on this, but uh, because this is just, it's so core. I mean, it the metaphysics of whether or not we start with a single sentient being or not will lead to your conclusions about morality. They will lead to your conclusions about logic. They will lead to your conclusions about biology and politics and physics. And that's why I'm so focused on this. It's I'm not getting into the specifics of some of the discussions that have been had on this topic, other than the one that I was involved in. But it's not just a fun discussion. It's a foundationally important discussion. Is what is the nature of reality? This is what the theory of everything discussion is about. What is the nature of reality? Oh, well, it's ideas. Oh, it's idealism. Oh, it's panpsychism. Oh, it's materialism. It's actually the constructs of the possible and the impossible, according to constructor theory. Like it's these constraints about what is possible. That, I mean, that's kind of fundamentally true, but it's not really, though, because even those are contextualized by a sentience. Like that is the great contextualizer. Is a single sentient being. It contextualizes everything, which makes me wish that I had been more coherent. But sometimes I do these streams, I will say, and I get off and I'm like, that was so cringe, and I'm just so like upset with how I've done on the stream. And then people message me and they're like, that was actually great. Like I really liked that, and I'm like, it's always the ones I don't like. So maybe this won't be liked, maybe not. But we will talk about it again when I've laid out more of an organized fashion. But if you have, if meaning can exist, and I don't mean meaning as far as information, I mean meaning as far as like the motivator of will. Okay? Like, or that which guides your will, almost, or that which is the goal of your will. That is really what it is. It's the most foundational goal of will is meaning, I think. You can lose that understanding of your meaning if you don't have the right foundations about the nature of the universe. And we see that everywhere. Look at what's happening with it when we teach people that this is a random, soap bubble in a universe that's really just, this I don't know, just blip, like, mistake made by some programmer or alien in a more advanced civilization or something, and like that's just playing a game, and that's not what's happening. But if you believe that, then you're going to be like, well, what's the point? What's the point of anything? What's the point of me? Why am I even important? What's the point of doing anything? What's the point of telling the truth? When there's no meaning, what's the point of telling the truth? But the thing is, though, is that if you don't start from the premise that meaning comes from impacting others, and that creation itself was for the sake of creating meaning or maximizing meaning, both maximizing and creating meaning. It's generating meaning. That's a good kind of like middle ground word for those two. It means like to grow and to create at the same time, to generate. Reality is generative. The logos is the generative structure of existence. That is for the sake of generating meaning for everyone, for you, for me, like, but if you don't, even if you come from like, I'm a theist because I believe in God, but this is my definition of God, is that he is an essence and not a being to start as a singular being, then there's no motivator for creation. I don't see it. And, if I'm wrong, like, I want, people to tell me, and I want them to tell me humbly and kindly because I'm trying to be kind too. Like this, there's a lot attached to these ideas, people feel attacked by, if you're an atheist or an anti-theist, by theists, and people who are theists feel attacked by atheists, and Christians feel attacked by, by, I don't know, Muslims, and Trinitarians feel attacked by Unitarians, and it's just like, there's a reason though for people feeling so strongly about this stuff, is because intuitively we know that it leads to our beliefs on everything. It contextualizes our beliefs on everything, on science and marriage and children and picking up your trash, outside your apartment, and telling the truth and working hard. I mean, it literally contextualizes everything. The most foundational realities are the most relevant because they are most universally relevant. And we do know this. And so I just want it to be obvious that I'm not here to attack anybody, or at least I hope that that's obvious. But I do want to talk about this topic because it's very important. It's not just about saying, oh, I believe in, X, Y, Z. You can say, I believe in a higher power. Okay. What does that mean? I believe in God. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it should mean something specific, right? I'm an atheist. What does that mean? Like, it needs to mean something specific. And God has to have a specific definition. The highest being. That being is person. A single person. That doesn't mean that the logos and lineage, essentially, of this single person doesn't manifest in a triadic fashion. Of course it does. Everything does. Look at physics and look at the Standard Model, and you see 3 generations of matter. It's there. Look at the primary colors, and you see 3 generations of colors. The secondary colors, again, same thing. You just see this again and again and again. And that's because it's just the only way that information can be generated and actions can be taken. The generation of information by God is an intentional thing. It has to be, because it's against his nature to create multiplicity. And the more multiplicity, the more information. The less multiplicity, the less information. So this has to be intentional. Like, the whole thing has to be intentional. It can't... If I thought about this a lot, I was like, was God always going to create the universe, or what did he have to choose? And it's the wrong question. He created it, and it had to be a choice. That's the answer. It's not that was he always going to do it, or was it that's not the right question, because it implies that time already exists, and there's so many things wrong with it. But the right question was creation in the nature, the most foundational nature of God, or does it seem to go against his most foundational nature? Well, his most foundational nature is oneness. It's singularness. It has to be. And because existence is a singular thing, there is no multiple existences. And if that's the case, then it takes a choice to break the pattern that is your most foundational nature. I mean, and this specifically itself has moral implications on us. Okay? I mean, think about it. Our most foundational nature isn't always motivating us to do the best thing in the world that we currently live in. Because, like I said, we're outside the garden. Our instincts are no longer in alignment with our environment because we've decided to create our own environment. And that abstract creation is what it means to be made in the image of God. It's the ability to create abstractly. It's like there are many beings that use tools. There are many beings that use tools in different degrees. Some of them, will even build tools, not just use their environment as tools, but will build tools. Birds build tools, and primates build tools, and lizards use tools. They don't build tools, but they use them. To some degree, I mean, king cobras make nests. So, like, is that building a tool? So that's not really tool building is not what defines humanity as being unique and in the image of God. It is our ability to build to our will, essentially. Not just, and to make choices in that, not just in accordance with our instincts. It's instincts that cause other beings to use tools and make tools even. But it's our instincts too, but it's their instincts only work in a specific environment, and we have more freedom in that. We can be like, okay, we need something that does that. Now let's design something that does that, instead of, just much more in the moment type of tool use, I guess. And there are multiple levels that exist even outside of humanity, but humanity is next level tools. That's why there's a knife here. It's because it's the most foundational tool. Somebody said in my comments, they were like, a knife isn't the most foundational tool. It's actually a club. It was a hammer, or basically a club or a rock, to smash things. And that is not the most foundational human tool, because birds use rocks to smash things, and sticks to move things and stuff like that. The thing about a knife is that it doesn't exist in nature. It's made. A club, a rock, a stick, they exist. You walk around and you find them. This has to be built. And that's what makes it the most foundational human tool, is what I should have said. So they are right. It's not the most foundational tool. It's the most foundational human tool. And, but, that abstract creation is kind of to create something that doesn't exist is similar to God. It's not the same thing, because we can create, objects out of what already exists. Because metal and the elements here and everything, those all existed. The molecules, we can kind of change them and things like that, but we can even make, elements. But matter exists. God creates sentience, generates sentience. We in a way that we just can't. He can create sovereignty of sentience, and we cannot do that. We can participate in that process, through having children and things like that. But ultimately, it's that sentience that inhabits that child that is born, or is conceived. Like, that sentience is not coming from us. It's coming from God. And that's why he has sovereignty over that. But it's not just a mechanical process like that. It's like you have to divide some of your sentient energy. And if you are sentience itself, then you can do that. But if you're not sentience itself, and you're just like, a knot of sentience, which is what we are, it's a knot within a loop that's a giant loop. It creates a smaller loop. Then you can't do that. So we're not God. And people ask me all the time, they say to me all the time, and they'll be like, you're right, God exists, and existence is sentient or conscious, but you are God. You're just God who forgot he's God. And that is not the right way to say it. And how you say these things matters. So that's why, I'm talking about this is like, is there a triality to the generationality of the logos of God that that is sentience? Yeah, sure. But how we discuss this is important, because we have to have if you want to understand the fundamental nature of reality, which is going to contextualize everything else for you, then the way that you talk about it matters. Not saying that you can't, if you want to say Allah, you want to say God, or you want to say, the super consciousness or something, like, I don't really care about that, but it matters whether or not you ascribe singular sentience to the all-encompassing context and the foundational creator that is the only uncreated being. There's only one uncreated being. There's one uncreated person. That's it. And every other person has to be created, because existence, it by nature is person. It's sentient, which means because there's only one existence, there's only one person at the top. It does matter that you understand the mechanics of that if you're going to contextualize things. It doesn't matter what you really call God, I don't think. I mean, maybe it does, but I'm not going to tell you how to refer to God. Every religion has countless ways of referring to God. Hashem, Allah, Adonai, God, Father. Like, it doesn't, it's just endless, and that's fine. But the way, the mechanics matters, and and also the way that you say things matters, not the words that you use alone, but in how they relate to other words, which means, and this is the point, is that there has to be a word for the being that is the highest being. And that being is a singular being. And I call that being God. But if you don't, if you say that there's that, like, that God is three persons in one essence, that is, you're defining the singular, all-encompassing context of this all into by an essence, which is not the same thing as a person. If you said it's three persons in one person, I'd be like, okay, that's fine. But if you're like, it's three persons in one essence, that is not, it's not correct, is what it is. It's not, it's not like I'm gonna come after you or anything like that. I can be your friend and it's fine. But I'm just saying it's wrong. And that does matter to how you deal with these things. And it's the same thing as saying, I am God versus, you being a piece of God, or there's a piece of God in you. That's fine. Either one of those is fine. But to say, you are God, that isn't okay. Even if it's not false, it's not true, really. And the reason why is because God is defined by being a sovereign person. And you're not that sovereign person. You have your own freedom of will and your own sovereignty, and so do they. And that is why it's not okay to say, but but you are God. There's a clip on Jordan Peterson's channel. We're going to talk. Well, let's look at this actually. And Kurt Jaimungal asked Jordan Peterson, what he thought, I guess, of a quote that I had, which was that if you did not perceive God, because God is all around you by definition, essentially, you have to assume that if you don't see God, and you don't see God in your life, then basically if you want to honestly consider God's existence, you have to assume that your conceptualization of God is wrong, and change your definition of God. It means that if you're going to assume God exists and you don't see him, then your conceptualization of what God is or who God is wrong, because you would see him everywhere because he is everywhere. And this was like the best question Kurt could have asked Jordan Peterson, or best statement that he could have gotten Jordan Peterson's take on. And because it's very important. But here we go. Jordan Peterson, Kurt Jaimungal. I realize, like I said, this is going to be a different kind of stream, guys. But I'll show you what Jordan Peterson said, and he said some things that are true, and then he said some things that are just not. And it highlights it highlights the importance of asking a question in a specific way, or just the importance of that.
That's okay if they're united under a higher order structure that unites them in some sense, but it's not okay at all. It's the situation in the desert when Moses is leading his people away from Egypt, right? It's the central organizing principle was the Egyptian totalitarian state had dissolved, and what happens is this descent into a fragmentation, and that's extremely dangerous. It's not the promised land, that's for sure. So the question is, well, what's the one that unites the many? That's the central religious question. Now, so then, and can't you say that the one that unites the many is the most real? Well, then you're in the domain of definition, right? At that point, it starts to become like a definition rather than a proposition.
That's why when you ask people to define, well, what is real, it just becomes tautological. Not that tautologies are trivial. So, for example, there's Chris Langan. He has one of the highest IQs recorded, along with Savant, I believe. He builds his theory of everything in some sense from a super tautology. It's an apodictic.
Well, that's God's definition of himself, right? I am that I am. That's God's definition of himself in the Bible.
Yeah, no, okay, man. I think we should get to the definitions of God. This is extremely interesting. So you mentioned what stays constant.
We tried it one part, right? Well, that's a good question. I think it's the spirit that guides our sequential transformations upward to a higher and higher form of unity, and maybe a higher and higher form of delight and love.
Do you think that we're all God? I'm sure you've heard some people say that we're God, but we've forgotten that we're God.
I can't answer a question like that exactly. I mean, I believe that the idea that we have a divine spark within is an extraordinarily beautiful, poetic, and necessary idea. And I think that if you act like that to yourself and other people, that things get radically interesting. Question, right? It's the same question. On both sides of the equation are equally dubious in relationship to one another. Because what you're trying to do is to say, is God real? Well, what you're not saying is, we know what real is, and it's this.
Hold on.
And does God fit into that category?
That's exactly.
So we know what God is in order to assess it.
Let's see here.
Consciousness itself. Is that divine? Well, each of God fit into that category.
It's also, we know what God.
I think this is it.
in order to assess it.
Well, because you could reverse it and say, is real God equally dubious in relationship to
I gotta find this, but this is what it was. But he said, is real God is the same question as is God real? That's not the same question. So this is what I mean by it matters. Like they have different conclusions, those two questions. Where is that though? That clip. It's right there, but I'm just like skipping over it because they're talking around the exactly what it was. This is it, I think. Hopefully.
This is something I heard from Tyler Goldstein, who has his own theory of everything. He said, ordinarily, here's how it works. We have a definition, and then we look for evidence, and then dismiss what we've just defined if we don't find the evidence. He said, perhaps what we should do when it comes to God is instead of looking for God and then not finding it and then saying God doesn't exist, you use the fact that you didn't find evidence of God as an indication that you should alter your definition of God.
Yeah, well, that's
So that'd be
sure.
incredibly
That's
interesting.
a
Now,
perfectly reasonable
sounds-
approach to that problem.
Right. Obviously, however,
No, that's a really good observation. Right?
Yeah,
It shows you how tricky questions like that are, right? It's like, well, maybe you're looking in the wrong place. Maybe you formulated your search incorrectly. Like, you don't know. Because let's say you're aiming at the highest reality, right? It's like you're aiming at the highest reality. Well, how do you know you have the question formulated properly? Because if you did, well, you'd have already found it. And so you might say, well, does the highest reality exist?
yes.
We're back to the problem of the one that unites the many.
Yeah.
It's not a problem. Where's the problem? Where's the problem? The one that unites the many is a problem? Where's the problem? I don't understand this. You know, it's such a non-problem. It's so obvious. If sentience is the primary nature of reality, then existence is by definition all that exists and therefore singular, and therefore it's a single sentient being. And it contains all other sentient beings. And there is a specific quasi-periodic fractal pattern that causes, that generates through, and, that's part of my work. And I do believe that it is expressed in Scripture, but I don't think that my work is opposed to Scripture at all. I think that it's perfectly consistent. But I don't get my work from Scripture. It just is amazing that it ends up working with Scripture. I think that any true scriptures out there or theological traditions, even Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three main movements of Abrahamic tradition are trialic. It's a trinity. And that's not a coincidence. It's because it can only be like that. And but there's so much in that pattern that you can break down, and I'm going to talk about it in, like I said, a video in the future. But how you understand these relationships does matter. You don't need to know everything, but what you do need to know, if you want to, to know anything really, is that you have to prioritize your own first-hand experience about that and what that tells you about the fundamental nature of reality above everything else. And you also have to prioritize your logic above everything else that is foundational. So the logic that's foundational is that existence is all that exists, and that means it's one. And your first-hand experience about the nature of reality is that sentience is your fundamental assumption, because you are. I am. You are. This is why God is I am that I am, as Jordan Peterson stated. It's like, I am. He is sentience. I am that I am means I am sentience. I am the singular sentience that unites all others and contextualizes all others and creates all others and you know encompasses and constrains all others. Like, that is who God is. You do, I think, have to know these things if you're going, but not just know them because I said them. Don't take anything I'm saying just because, like, I said it. Obviously, I would. That's idol worship. That's terrible. Don't do that. But if I'm making sense, then it's great. But if I'm not, then be like, tell me in the chat. You know, I could be wrong. I'm wrong on all kinds of things, but this is, you know, put a lot of effort into this, more than I've put into anything else. So, and, you know, to reason from first principles the nature of reality. And it's not actually that hard. What's hard is making sure that you're starting from the right place. That's what's, and that when you're asking a new question, that you're maintaining coherence, you know, that's what's hard. But it's not actually hard. Like, it doesn't take like high IQ or anything like that. It just takes humility, which is self-honesty. Honesty with oneself, about oneself, and therefore also about the world. And because it's about our experience. And that's what humility is. So if you're, the more humble you are, the better you are at figuring out the nature of reality. Not the higher IQ you are. That's not what it is at all. It comes down to humility. Completely. You know, it's funny because Moses is assumed in the Abrahamic tradition to be the humblest man in the world to ever live. And what's funny is that it's written in the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. Moses is the humblest man in the world. And it's funny because Moses wrote that. He wrote the first 5 books. And, you know, it's said that basically, like, the first 4 were really directly just, you know, channeled from God to Moses. But the 5th one was kind of his summary on the rest. But he wrote it with his hands, though. And that's at least, you know, that's the assumption. And I think that is the assumption that matters. So doesn't, you know, people get into historical things. No, I'm not saying they're wrong, that I'm just saying, like, there's relevance when it comes to interpreting information. And, like, this is interesting. It's interesting to take into the context that is meant to be the context. That's the context that's you're supposed to take it. If you take something out of context, and I'm not saying that it's not historically accurate either. I would assume that it is true in the ways that matter, and that could be inclusive of history. I think the Bible, or the scripture, as I've said, is super literal. It's historical, it's predictive, it is it's also metaphorical. It's all these things simultaneously. It's super literal. It's not literal, it's not historical, it's not, you know, it's all of them. And, you know, I've said this before, people say scripture isn't, and I don't remember who said this, I didn't say it though. They said scripture isn't what happened, it's what happens. That's true. That's true. It's what happened, it's what will happen, and it's what happens constantly again and again. And that's the right way to look at scripture, no matter where you think it came from. That is the intention of it. But what's funny is it says, you know, Moses is the humblest man in the world. And Dennis Prager said this. He was like, how can Moses write, I'm the humblest man in the world? It seems contradictory. But, and he's like, how could God let him get away with that? And he said, if it's true. If Moses was being humble, meaning being honest, and he was the humblest man, it's the only humble thing that you can do is to say, I'm the humblest man in the world. And so, you know, it's not a surprise that, like, he wrote the Torah. Like, humility is how you figure out reality. It's not IQ. But you know, and I recognize that, you know, these discussions involve like implications about which religion is right or wrong, and I don't think any of them, the major religions, are wrong. And like, you go to which one resonates with you the most. That's what I believe. And you know, if they have the message of treat others the way that you would want your own to be treated, then they probably have enough right for it to be worth, you know, worth your investment, and wise beyond us as individuals. And like, that's all that matters. And so, you know, this talk tonight is not to debate one religion over another. I think that any, you know, I'm not, personally, as I've stated before, you know, I believe that I agree with the Christians and who is the Messiah, and I think that, you know, you know, he, if that's true, then he would be the logos of God, and like, that's fine. I'm not here to bash any religions. I think that the divisions between these religions is about our human misinterpretations. It's our fault that we think these don't fit together as puzzle pieces. It's not their fault. They were, you know, given by God. I think. You don't have to, but I do. And, you know, but if you back up and you look at them, it's interesting. It's like, why is there a triality to, or Trinity, whatever you want to, however you want to say it, to even the religions in the or the theological traditions in the Abrahamic tradition, I guess you could say. Religions, I hate that word. It was a word made by atheists to describe something they don't understand, I think. The problem with religion as a term is, even though it's not wrong in that it is each one of these is meant to provide a framework for you to help, you know, navigate the world, is it also assumes that they don't fit together in some way and that the other one is wrong. It's like we assume today that there's competing religions, and that's not true. If a theological tradition is true, which I believe multiple ones are, then they're not in conflict. Their focus is different. Judaism has lessons on community and what is a community, where does it come from, you know, how does it relate to lineage, and how does it relate to you know, practice and you know, or rules. And then you have Islam, which is about, you know, what is a good culture, what is the right way to act and way to live. And you have Christianity, which is like, what is our cornerstone beliefs that you know, would help us go forward. And that's kind of what I take away from all of those, is I think that each one of those has deep truth to convey in those three things, but they all are united, like everything else and everyone else, in the context of one God. It has to be the case. And that God is a person. It's a single person. It has to be. And that is what I wanted to say tonight, I guess. Let's see the chat. I hope you guys found value from that. Thank you for the super chat, Torin. What do you think of beaver, otter, seal, sea cow, dolphin, and whale intelligence? I think that they are all basically the same as far as relevance goes. Like, they have this, they exist on the same level of sentience. But they are, you know, one might have a higher IQ than others. I think whales have higher IQs than us, but they can't do anything because they don't have no thumbs and they live in the water and you can't make fire, and like, what are you going to do? But I think dolphins probably have a higher IQ than human beings. You know, I was thinking the other day at my job, there's like lots of people that work at the company. I'm not going to talk about like specifics of anything, but it's like a dog that is in the office, and there's a couple dogs, and those dogs know everybody in the office. Like, they only bark at people who's like, it's like their first few days, and it's like hundreds of people, and or it's like over 100 people. And I was like, how do they keep track of everyone in their mind? They know who is supposed to be there and who isn't. That doesn't mean they know everyone personally, like really well or anything, but it's like they pick it up within like days of who is supposed to be in the office, I've noticed. And it blew my mind. I was just thinking about it, and I was like, I just wonder like what's going on in their head. They're not dumb, that's for sure. I don't know what to make of it other than that, but you know, these beings have friends, they have romantic relationships, they have enemies, and they're able to keep track of all these different other beings and people in their life, but not humans, but people. Where are you in pop culture lately? Somebody's screaming outside. We should pray for them. I mean that literally. That sounds very angry. Interestingly, no sea mammal builds a nest, whereas sea reptiles do. Yeah, but I mean, sea mammals give birth to live young. Why would they build a nest? Sea snakes give birth to live young. They don't build a nest. Intention is will and goal. Basically, yeah. Much love. Thank you. You've got to have Tom Campbell again. I'm going to talk to Tom Campbell. I've never had him on, but I will talk to him eventually. We possess the one thing God does not: limit. God does have limit, but his own limit. He is his own limit. People ask this all the time. They're like, especially self-described atheists, they're like, can God create a rock so heavy you can't lift it? And I used to ask that. And it seems like a smart question, but it's actually a bad question. The real question is, does God have limits? Yeah, God is actually the most constrained being that has ever existed and will ever exist. He's also the most sovereign being that has ever existed and will ever exist, because they're not independent, they're dependent. They're not mutually exclusive, they're dependent. Constraints are what causes the creation of paths, and paths are what allows for choice, I guess. So there was a point in which God had one choice: create or don't. He didn't even have a choice in what to create, I don't think. I mean, he had that's not true necessarily. He didn't have a choice. I don't think God has that much of a choice in how to create the universe, if his goal is to create meaning. And at least, and otherwise, how would I be able to map it? And I mean, if you watch this channel, then you've seen, I don't know everything, but like, I've mapped a lot, from creation to the levels of sentience. I think I've got pretty close, at least. And if that wasn't logically constrained, then I wouldn't be able to do it. But God is the most sovereign and being in the world, most powerful, or most sovereign being. He's not in the world. He is the world, essentially. But not like the world that we think of as the world. But he is our environment. Like, ultimately. Not proximately. Right now we're trying to make our own, which is a problem. But I don't know if it's a problem, but it causes problems, I will say that. But ultimately, our environment is God. But, even Eric Weinstein said this. He said, it seems like God isn't just all-powerful, he's all-constrained. And those two things are not separate. They're kind of dependent on each other, to be honest. I think is he is the most powerful being that ever will be, and ever has been, and that is. But he has limits, but his limits are himself. Like, that's his limits. His oneness is a limit. It is his ultimate limit. His existence is a limit. He cannot not exist. I don't think God could end his existence if he tried. If he wanted to, and he was like, it was just him, and he's like, this is meaningless. I'm alone. I don't want to be here. I'm out. He couldn't do that, I don't think. I think that the constraints of information, coherence, and an enclosed system itself prevent God from not existing, which means they are, they also explain God's existence. They explain the existence of sentience itself. There's no other explanation for sentience than that. But you could say, oh, well, no, maybe it evolved. What's driving evolution? Entropy is intrinsic to the world that we perceive, at least. It's not really fundamental. It appears to be, though. And so what's driving things to go against entropy, or to generate and to grow? Will from a sentient being. From sentient beings. My will, your will, God's will. It all factors in, but ultimately it's God. And but God has limits, but they are his own. Like, God can't end his... Like, a better question than could God create a rock that he can't lift is like, could God end his existence if he wanted to? I don't think he could. That's fascinating. And, it causes... It starts to contextualize things for you and helps you understand him too. Like, you're like, dang, you couldn't not be here. You had no choice in that. And you were alone and meaningless. And you had no choice in existing and being alone and meaningless. Like, and then he, against his nature, created multiplicity and meaning itself and us, and instantly became the most meaningful being that ever existed, that ever could exist, and also the only being that has ever been meaningless. We can feel meaningless, but we're not meaningless. We give God meaning by just being here, by being, born and into the world. We give God meaning. So we have meaning intrinsically because multiplicity exists. He had none. So we can feel alone, but we're never alone. He's always there, and there's always others around us too. But, by the time we come into existence, even if we were the second person to be made, and by person, I mean, or even if we were the second person to exist, the second sentient being to exist, after God, you're still have intrinsic meaning, and you're never alone because God's always there. He's the only one that's ever been alone and meaningless. We can just feel alone and meaningless, but it's false. That's a huge thing to understand. How does that not, drastically alter your perception on the world and on your life? You have intrinsic meaning that you're, and you're never alone. There's always a being that's, more powerful than any other being that's, created you intentionally. That's a huge thing. There's nothing I can think of bigger than that, really. But for that to be the case, then it also would imply that God prior to creation was meaningless and alone. And God has feelings. That sounds like it sucks. I bet you it did suck. Because he changed it. Why would you change it if it was great? You think he was like, oh, this is great. I love being meaningless and alone. No. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. That's how I know that's true. He puts up with our nonsense, and he wouldn't if it wasn't worth it for some other reason, beyond just... I mean, if it wasn't worth it, he wouldn't put up with it. The G word is fine here, I'm sure. Good. Should be. Where are you in the pop culture lately? Do you watch Yellowstone or South Park? I watch South Park sometimes, but I haven't watched it in years. I watch like one episode per year at this point, but I have watched every episode up into a certain season, and it was like in the teens. But it's been like 5 years or 6 years since I've watched. And it's probably been like four years since I've watched like really South Park, but I've maybe 5, but I've watched every episode up until that, and I love that show. It reminds me of the Bible. It's like the story of humanity. Humanity is like this child that ends up, but it's all the parents are just, they are like, you know, they represent the humans in it, and they go and they do something stupid and they start idol worshiping in some way, and then the town gets destroyed, and then at the end the children are like, we learned something here today. And it's like, it's probably the closest thing to the Bible, I think, in any pop culture. But I haven't seen any of the new ones. I don't watch Yellowstone. And yeah. I don't watch things unless I watch it with my wife. I don't have time for TV outside of my wife. And my wife and I binge, so I'm not like, oh, I don't watch TV. I don't have time. Like, we binge watch shows, but I like Westworld. I liked that show a lot. That was very interesting. And I've watched a lot of other major shows, but not Yellowstone. Don't forget elephants and primates. Hell, even birds. Yep, it's rare to see many ups and downs in the views of a single stream. Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely been like, I don't know what you mean by that, but I feel like this has been like a interesting stream. Seems like people really paid quite close attention to this video. Good. You know, that's what I mean. Like, it's always the ones I'm like, oh man, that was so cringe. And I just think about how incoherent I was at some point or something. And I just am like, oh, I wish I prepared more. But, especially if it's going to deal with God. But, you know, the reality is, like, you know, I don't know. It'll either work out or it won't. But it is funny that it's always the ones that I'm so critical of that people seem to like. But the thing is like, that makes sense because I'm looking at these streams from a different perspective than everybody else looking at them. So, like, it makes sense that I would have misalignment in some way with, you know, what people pay attention to. Whatever the truth is, we're smack in the middle of it. Yeah, whatever the truth is, we're smack in the middle of it. But the truth is sentient, and you're smack in the middle of it. And you have to admit that, because the truest thing that you know is that you're sentient. And if you don't know that, you're going to fall apart. Not like I have anything significantly better to say. That's the dog's small world. Our world is much larger than dogs. Yeah, that's true. Does he have most meaningful existence, or the first other have more meaning? That's a great question. Does the first being that God creates have more meaning than God? I don't know. Because that being gives God meaning and is everything to God. You know, God, his sense of meaning is probably not that different from us, and that he wants to impact people positively, others positively, you know. And because if you don't impact others positively, then you're leading to decay, which means like your impact is minimized, you know, because it's self-defeating in a way. Eventually it fizzles out. But if you're impacting people positively and it causes them to grow and to impact others positively and maybe be fruitful and multiply, you know, like that is the only way to like maximize meaning, is to do it in a positive sense. But that is honestly a great question, Torin. Is God the most meaningful being, or is the first being? You know, I'm going to go with God. And the reason why is because every being that exists that other than God owes their existence to God alone. And whereas, like, I don't know if we could say that about the first being other than God, but it's close. But that being owes its existence to God too. I don't know. It's a very interesting question. I'm going to think about it a lot after the stream, probably. I mean, I kind of thought about it before, but I've never, like, I feel like I'm thinking about it more clearly now than I have in the past. But it doesn't mean I have an answer. I don't know. It's a very good question. But I also don't know if it's a, even though it's a very interesting question, I will say it might not be important. But it is interesting. Is it the storyteller or the main character? Does he have them? Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. What's the most meaningful being? The one who wrote the book, or the main character in the book? Maybe they just require each other for meaning. And so, I don't know. One's certainly more powerful than the other. That's true. But more meaningful? I don't know. Also, new Beavis and Butthead are really hilarious. I never watched it. I've never seen that show ever. The last couple episodes of South Park have been pretty good. I heard they're funny. I even told my wife I want to watch them because I just saw people talking about it. I just love that show, but I've never watched Beavis and Butthead. Anyways, any final questions, guys? Before I call it, it's 10. That's about 2 hours. I just want to end and say, like I said, this is not an attack on any of the major religions of the world. I think they're all true, and any inconsistencies between them are caused by our lack of a God's eye view of things. And any traditions that lead you to treat others the way that you would want your own to be treated is good. And but I do think that, even if you don't like the term God and you want to use, I don't know, the uncreated creator, or the Allah or Hashem, or whatever you want to call it, call them, that one, I do think it does matter whether or not there's one existence as a single sentient being in your theological model. It might not matter. It might not be obvious that it matters because at first, because in the proximate sense, you might be tied to structures that are rooted in the an ultimate singular sentience. But if you don't stay grounded in that idea, then the problem is that if you lose those institutions and things like that ground you, that are built on that idea and that are grounding you, then you will have some decoherence a little bit as you move around. Decoherence isn't the same thing as being confused. It means, like, decoherence is when you don't even realize that you're confused. That's different. It's like you don't understand that you're not making sense because you're not if you're coherent and you're like, I'm losing it here, like I don't know what to make of this question and I'm confused. But I'm confused on things right now. Like, there are things that lately, a couple things that I was just like confused about, and it was bothering me. And but it was that's not the same thing as as losing coherence. You don't know when you're confused when you lose coherence. Eric Weinstein once said to an entire Discord room that I was on, and I agreed with him. I didn't think that it, like, I understood why he was saying that, but I'm not saying everybody in the room suffered from it. I don't think I did, but nobody thought they did. That's the point, is that, and I recognize that. Like, of course I wouldn't think that, but he said, you all have malware in your minds, and it's like, you wouldn't know if you did. You can figure it out if you're humble enough, but that's the only way to do it. You can't be smart enough. You cannot be smart enough to figure out if you're incoherent. You have to be humble enough to figure it out. It's not about IQ. As much as I respect Chris Langan, like, and I do, like, and he would probably agree with this, is like, it's not about IQ. IQ helps you in this world, like, do things quickly, and but it doesn't mean cognitive tasks quicker than most people, but quicker doesn't mean more accurate necessarily. So but incoherence is different from confusion. Confusion is, you're confused. Incoherence is, you don't know you're confused. You have no idea, and you won't know until it, like, reveals itself to you. But the best way to maintain coherence as best you can is to ground yourself in the foundational truth that you can assume either via logic or personal experience. And I've talked about on here before, I've had both of those. My experience with God is through both of those. And I thought about talking about personal things on here about God, but I think I'm going to not. But just know that I have had them. And so have a lot of people, not claiming to be alone. But also, you have to take your personal experience with you and yourself and as a sentient being as, like, evidence of what the nature of existence is. You have to ground yourself in that. And it's not a complicated thing to understand a singular God. It's super simple. It's not even simple. It's super simple. Existence is one because there's only one existence, and the fundamental nature of existence is personness or sentience. That's it. And you have to assume that's true. Like, even if it was false, you'd have to assume it's true, because the logic implies that, and also that is your experience. And you have to prioritize that information, or else you're going to lose coherence. So even if it was false, you'd have to assume that it's true until for some reason something shows you a more fundamental nature of reality than what is your constant, everyday, inescapable experience, which, good luck with that. That's not going to happen. But that is what would have to happen for you to be like, yeah, existence is not primarily sentient. And I'm not going to assume that. You can thought experiment it all you want in your head, and that's good. You should do that. You should, challenge things, but that's not the same thing as just rejecting what's in front of your face all the time. It's not even the same as rejecting what's in front of your face. It's like rejecting your face. Like, to say, oh, reality is not primarily sentient. It's a rejection of self. It's a rejection of your own being. And it's also a rejection of God. But it's, it's a rejection of yourself, too. Which, I don't know which one is more foundational and more important. I don't think there is one more important for you to know. Like, you exist, and so does God. And so you have to know both of those things. Like, and that's it. That's there. You can't really have one or the other. You have to have either both or neither. Which is, you can't say that you have neither unless you're going to be like, I'm doing my thesis on the philosophy of consciousness and that consciousness doesn't exist. Okay, you're doing your thesis on that which doesn't exist. There's no coherence there. They don't know, they're confused. Oh, free will is actually, the illusion of free will is an illusion. You don't know, you're confused. It's not complicated. Any interesting updates on your herps or projects you'll be working on? Actually, just to like, I will share like videos of it when it's done, but I'm building a enclosure for my Amazon tree boas, which is my favorite snakes that I own. And I built one and I'm redoing it because I had a really poor design of the divider between them. And I couldn't get it out once I built it without taking the cage apart. And so I'm redoing the entire thing internally, the like mechanisms. And I spent months designing it, and I got all the parts cut today, so I'm putting it together this weekend, and I'll share. It's cool. I love building things. Like I think that it's the best way to learn how to think, is to build things. Like whatever your hobby is, figure out how to like fix the things that are necessary for your hobby. For me, it's like cages and irrigation and all kinds of stuff. And you'll learn how to think, not from school. You can't learn how to think in school. It's literally almost antithetical to the model of what school is today. That doesn't mean there's no instances of it, but it's like very few instances of school where you are encouraged to think in school. If you're sitting in a desk, it's almost impossible. I mean, there's one instant, I will say this, like word problems. I always liked word problems because they caused me to think, and I never was good at memorizing equations because I just wasn't interested. But I was good at like word problems in math, and it's like, oh, if there's this, is going on, this is going on, this is going on, figure it out. It's like I could figure it out in my head without knowing the equations that most people would use. But that is thinking. But even then, it slowed me down, and compared to everybody else who's just like memorizes the equation, and it negatively impacted my performance in school. So like it's not reinforced, even though that's like an instance of actual thinking. But yeah, so I will share pictures of it. It's very cool. But yeah, thank you everybody. Memes of Destruction, real sea guns. Interesting heavy duty stuff as usual. Yeah, this was pretty heavy duty. Yeah. Treat each other the way that you would want to be treated. And know that you were created by a single being intentionally. And you'll be all right, I think. No matter what else, other questions you have in the world. And there's endless questions that all of us will have to face. You just have to be grounded in them. So with that, peace. Thank you for dealing with my unpreparedness, and I will see you guys next week. If you want to join our Discord call live tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific, message me on Instagram and I will send you the link. It's a great community and it's a good time. We have a live call every week. There's a link to a Patreon below. Next week we should talk about constructor theory, I think, and I think that's it. Peace.